Understanding the main categories of emotional triggers. In the previous discussions, we examined how emotions can be triggered and how our past experiences can influence the way we respond to situations. Today, I would like to examine the main categories of emotional triggering mechanisms, and more importantly, how we can prepare ourselves to deal with them. If we go through our emotional history record, we can identify some of the probable situations that may trigger emotional reactions in the future. Whenever possible, we should try to avoid such situations. But this precautionary approach is not always possible. For example, you may know that a particular type of conversation usually makes you angry. You may try to avoid such conversations, but you cannot always avoid them. You may have to deal with a difficult colleague, receive an unexpected message, attend a stressful meeting, or face a situation that reminds you of an unpleasant experience. Therefore, we need an alternative strategy for facing such situations. The purpose of this strategy should be clear: to reduce the probability of negative emotions being triggered, and if they are triggered despite our precautions, to minimize their harmful effects. The precautions required for different triggering mechanisms are not identical. However, they can be broadly categorized into three different types. 1. Disturbing. The process of combining sensory inputs. The first strategy is to disturb the process of combining inputs received from the sense organs. In other words, we try not to allow these inputs to form continuous data streams that can automatically be compared with similar patterns stored in our past memories. Some of those memories may be associated with unpleasant or frightening events. Imagine, for example, a person who previously experienced a frightening incident while driving during heavy rain. Years later, driving in heavy rain may cause the person to experience anxiety, even though there is no immediate danger. The present situation may contain a pattern that resembles the earlier experience. According to the model we are discussing, the brain can compare the continuously changing information received through the senses with similar patterns stored in memory. Therefore, one possible strategy is to interrupt or disturb this continuous process of combining sensory information. This does not mean ignoring reality or pretending that the situation does not exist. Rather, it means preventing the mind from continuously building and reinforcing the particular pattern that is associated with the unpleasant memory. This too, focusing on the activity of receiving information. The second strategy is different. Here, instead of concentrating on identifying the information received through the sense organs, we focus our attention on the activity of receiving the information itself. This can reduce the possibility of negative emotions being triggered by past experiences associated with particular forms of identification. This mechanism can be understood through the example of a phobia. Consider someone who has a strong fear of spiders. The person may not need to encounter an actual spider for the emotional response to begin. Even a photograph of a spider may be sufficient. The important point here is that the emotional response can be triggered simply by identifying a particular static situation. The eyes receive information. The information is identified as a spider, and the stored association may immediately produce fear. In such a situation, focusing on the activity of receiving visual information rather than concentrating on identifying the object may help reduce the possibility of the emotional reaction. Again, this is a model for understanding how we may prepare ourselves. It does not mean that we should deliberately expose ourselves to overwhelming situations without appropriate preparation. The important idea is that the skill required for this type of triggering mechanism is different from the skill required for the first type. Learn 3. Minimizing attention given to physical pain. The third strategy concerns physical pain. Physical pain itself can become a trigger for negative emotions. One way of minimizing the emotional consequences is to reduce the attention given to the pain by focusing on the related part of the body. When attention is directed carefully toward the relevant body part, the experience of pain can be observed more specifically rather than allowing the entire mind to become occupied by the unpleasant sensation.